Today, the nation honors the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. 50 years ago last month, the year after his assassination, an athlete inspired by the civil rights movement and King's efforts to create a more equal society demanded change in the realm of sport. It was an effort that many at the time considered futile, even foolish, and certainly self-destructive. But Curt Flood would not relent. He would not give in, and eventually he would prevail.
After 12 years in the major leagues, I do not feel that I am a piece of property to be bought and sold irrespective of my wishes.
I believe that any system which produces that result violates my basic rights as a citizen and is inconsistent with the laws of the United States.
On Christmas Eve, 1969, Curt Flood's letter to Baseball Commissioner Bowie Kuhn started a movement that would change sports forever. 2 months earlier, Flood was stunned when he was unceremoniously traded from St. Louis to Philadelphia. His letter, elegant in its defiance, served notice that baseball's reserve clause, which bound players to their current teams, was no longer acceptable. Curt Flood refused the trade.
Curt's from Oakland, and we all know during the civil rights movement what happened in that town. You had the Black Panthers. The atmosphere in Oakland was one of we're moving forward, we're moving forward. This was his Civil Rights Act.
You're a man who makes $90,000 a year, which isn't exactly slave wages. What's your retort to that?
A well-paid slave is nonetheless a slave.
If any player was built to fight baseball, it was Flood, a center fielder who had won 7 consecutive Gold Gloves and had been a major force in the Cardinals' 1964 and 67 World Series championships. St. Louis teammate Tim McCarver, who was in the same trade as Flood and agreed to go to Philadelphia, echoed the player's feelings at the time.
I had no idea that any player would ever test a reserve clause, and it would take that player sacrificing the rest of his career for it to be effective.
11 days before Flood sent the letter, Marvin Miller, the executive director of the Players Association, had invited him to the executive board meeting in Puerto Rico to make his case to the union's player reps.
He called it his freedom flight. He needed the union to support him through this process.
Marvin Miller was very honest, and he said, Curt, you realize if they don't elect to have a free agent and change this around, you'll never have another job in baseball.
Curt Flood argued that the players' only hope to break the owner's iron fist control was unity. After hearing his impassioned plea, the player reps voted unanimously to back Flood. On January 16, 1970, Curt Flood filed a civil lawsuit against Commissioner Kuhn challenging baseball's reserve clause.
After that unanimous vote, he felt that the players would be there with him. He realized after they were witnessing the way he was being treated and the pains that he was going through, it might not be a good idea to step out and follow him closely.
Flood's case started in the spring of 1970. Former major leaguers Hank Greenberg, Jim Brosnan, and Jackie Robinson were the only 3 players who ever appeared in court to support him.
And I'm a bit regretful of that. I think we could have done a better job at supporting Curt. I've never said that, but I do feel like that, because in essence, he was by himself. And that's a heavy burden.
After sitting out the entire 1970 season, Flood had 35 at-bats with the Washington Senators by the end of April 1971.
The fans were loud and mean and vicious. Inward, we're going to kill you. In his locker was a funeral wreath. And he said if they were able to get this wreath past security, then I need to leave because somebody's going to kill me.
Curt Flood, only 33 years old, left baseball. He was living in exile in Spain when his case reached the Supreme Court. In 1972, the justices voted against Flood 5-3.
He was devastated. He had given up his whole life. He was in a foreign country, out of fear.
But Curt Flood's courageous stand in 1969 cracked baseball's foundation. In 1975, the walls came tumbling down. Pitchers Andy Messersmith and Dave McNally won their arbitration cases, effectively giving players their freedom and a victory most never thought they would see.
Curt Flood challenging the reserve clause was essential to the blossoming sport we have today.
He took a stand for the players. He took a stand to make a change. That's how leaders are built.
Baseball takes pride in celebrating its heroes. Curt Flood, one of the greatest heroes of them all, should no longer be overlooked.
For the same reason people were lynched when they marched, for the same reason that when ministers spoke in their churches and spoke of them getting the right to vote, their churches would be bombed. You have to go forward with what's right. So he went forward.
In his majority opinion in Flood versus Kuhn, Supreme Court Justice Harry Blackmun described baseball's antitrust exemption as an aberration and an anomaly, but he declined to strike it down. In the New York Times, Red Smith, the legendary columnist, wrote of the verdict, "It's a great disappointment because this court seems to set greater store in property rights than human rights." Curt Flood died in 1997 at the age of 59. In 1969, his final season, the average Major League salary was $24,909. In 2019, 45 years after the advent of free agency, it was $4.36 million.
Wow.